The rain came down in sheets, sliding off the cracked neon sign of Curtis Doyle's pawn shop, pooling in the uneven sidewalk where Daniel Cross stood, clutching a folded piece of paper like it was his last tether to the world. Beside him, under the flickering glow of a streetlight, his 1997 Harley-Davidson Softail gleamed, its chrome slick with water, its spirit as heavy as the choice he was about to make. The air smelled of wet asphalt and desperation, and Daniel's eyes, swollen not from the rain but from a decision that cut deeper than any blade, stared at the bike he called Grace. It wasn't just metal and rubber, it was his freedom, his pride, his one escape from a life that had been closing in for years. He pressed his calloused hand against the cold fuel tank, whispering words no one else could hear, a final goodbye to the machine that had carried him through divorce, job loss, and the slow unraveling of dreams. Behind the pawn shop's grimy glass, Curtis reached for the keys, his face blank as a ledger. In the puddle at Daniel's feet, the Harley's reflection trembled, like a heartbeat being stolen. A passerby slowed, sensing something sacred was slipping away, but no one stopped. No one could know that this moment, this sale, would soon ripple through the small town of Ashwood, stirring hearts, sparking whispers, and calling forth a thunder no one saw coming. Daniel Cross, 42 years old, wasn't a rich man, but he'd once been proud. His hands, rough from years welding steel, now shook more from sleepless nights than labor. Grace had been his only indulgence, a machine that roared louder than his doubts, carrying him through the wreckage of a failed marriage and the weight of raising his son alone. His boy, Oliver, just 9 years old, lay in a rented house across town, hooked to machines that hummed through the night, fighting a rare blood disorder that drained Daniel's savings faster than he could earn them. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, each one a brick in a wall he couldn't climb. He'd sold his tools, his furniture, even his wedding band, but it wasn't enough. So, under the rain's relentless drum, Daniel walked to the pawn shop, each step heavier than the last, knowing Grace was all he had left. Ashwood was a town where pines scented the air and dreams of leaving rarely came true. Daniel had grown up here, a kid who'd once believed he'd see the world. Instead, he joined a welding crew, building bridges across state lines, and married Claire, whose laughter once filled their small home like sunlight. But money troubles chipped away at their love, and by the time Oliver was 4, Claire was gone, leaving only occasional postcards and a void Daniel filled with late-night shifts and packed lunches. He'd been a good father, tucking Oliver in, bandaging scraped knees, and teaching him to dream through superhero sketches and race car posters. But when Oliver's diagnosis hit, it was like a storm with no warning. Insurance barely helped. The factory cut Daniel's hours, and the hospital bills kept coming, each one colder than the last. Grace had been his sanctuary, the one thing he swore he'd never part with. Riding it, with Oliver's small arms wrapped around him, laughing like he could fly, was the closest Daniel ever came to feeling whole. Now, watching Curtis wheel the bike into the shop's shadows, Daniel felt stripped bare, nothing left but a father's desperate love. He trudged home, soaked to the bone, the pawn ticket in his pocket like a wound he couldn't close. Inside, Oliver looked up from his bed, his eyes tired but bright. "Dad, you're wet," he whispered, voice thin but teasing. Daniel forced a smile, ruffling his son's hair, and said nothing about the Harley. He sat by the bed, listening to the oxygen machine's steady hum, closing his eyes to imagine the bike's rumble instead the way Oliver used to giggle, arms spread like wings, pretending to soar. That memory hurt worse than the debt. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about the bond between father and son. Without Grace, Daniel felt he'd failed twice, once as a man, now as a father. By morning, Ashwood was buzzing. News traveled faster than smoke here, and whispers of Daniel's sacrifice filled the diner, the barber shop, the gas station. To outsiders, it was just a bike sale, but to those who knew him, Grace was part of Daniel's soul. He'd ridden it in charity runs, led veterans parades, even played Santa one Christmas, hauling gifts through town. When neighbors heard he'd pawned it, they knew something was broken. The waitress at Maple's diner slipped extra pie onto his plate. The pastor left groceries at his door. But sympathy didn't pay hospital bills, and Daniel's pride kept him silent. He showed up to work, hands steady with the welding torch, though his eyes betrayed exhaustion. At night, He told Oliver stories instead of truths, shielding him from the fraying rope of their lives. But Ashwood had sharper eyes in its shadows. On the edge of town, men who lived by their own code noticed everything. 3 days later, Daniel returned to the pawn shop, desperate for a little more cash against Grace. Curtis leaned on the counter, his wiry frame all business. "Cross, you already squeezed every cent out of that Harley. Can't get blood from a stone." Daniel's jaw tightened. He slid Oliver's latest hospital bill across the counter, its numbers cruel in black ink. Curtis shrugged, unmoved. "It's business." As Daniel turned to leave, a low rumble shook the pavement outside. Through the glass, 3 motorcycles idled, their riders dripping rainwater, leather jackets stitched with skulls and flames. They were the kind of men folks crossed the street to avoid. Daniel passed them, feeling the weight of their stares. The tallest, with iron-gray hair, locked eyes with hema glance that felt like judgment and recognition all at once. They entered the shop after him. Curtis later swore he said nothing, but word spread fast. The bikers asked about the Harley. They asked about the father. And suddenly, Daniel's struggle was no longer invisible. The next evening, engines roared outside Daniel's house. He stepped onto the porch, heart pounding. 6 Harleys lined the curb, headlights cutting through the dusk like wolves' eyes. Oliver pressed his face to the window, wide-eyed with wonder. Daniel's first instinct was fear. He knew the biker's reputation in Ashwood. But when the tallest rider removed his helmet, his expression was solemn, not threatening. "You Daniel Cross?" he asked, voice gravelly but steady. Daniel nodded, wary. "Name's Reaper," the man said. "We heard about your boy." Silence hung heavy, thicker than the summer heat. Reaper pulled a faded Polaroid from his jaqueta. "Younger him, riding with a little girl. We don't like seeing a man sell his soul to keep his kid alive." The other bikers nodded, their engines idling like growling dogs. Daniel's throat tightened. For the first time, strangers carried his burden without asking. Oliver, grinning through the glass, whispered, "Dad, they're angels." Daniel stepped down, pride warring with gratitude. "I don't need charity," he said firmly. Reaper tilted his head, studying him. "Ain't charity. It's brotherhood." The others stayed silent, their presence louder than words. Reaper explained their chapter of Hell's Angels had seen too many fathers break under hospital bills. "We've buried brothers who gave up too soon. Not letting you be one of them." Daniel shook his head, torn. "I don't even know you." Reaper smirked faintly. "Don't need to. We know enough." A woman with fiery red braids, Fox, handed Daniel an envelope. Inside were crisp bills, more money than he'd seen in months. "Why?" he whispered. Fox shrugged. "Because one day it could be us." Oliver banged on the window, laughing at the bikes. That sound cracked Daniel's walls more than the cash. For the first time, he considered trusting men society told him to fear. A week later, Ashwood's diner hummed with tension. Daniel walked in, flanked by 2 bikers, their boots heavy on the linoleum. He'd tried to refuse their company, but they insisted a man shouldn't eat alone when his world's falling apart. At a corner booth, Reaper laid out their plan. They'd reached out to regional chapters. "We got brothers coast to coast, Daniel. When we call, they ride." Daniel felt dizzy. The waitress poured coffee with trembling hands, locals staring with a mix of curiosity and fear. Fox leaned in. "You're not alone anymore. We're holding a ride. Every dollar goes to Oliver." Daniel froze, overwhelmed. This wasn't pity, it was an army moving for him. But Reaper warned, "Once we start, people will talk. Some will hate it. Some will fight it. You got the spine for that." Daniel's voice cracked. "For my son, I'll stand with you." The morning of the fundraiser ride, dawn painted the sky silver. Dozens of Harleys lined the cracked asphalt lot of Maple's diner, chrome glinting like fire. Daniel stood among them, heart pounding like he was stepping into battle. Reaper clapped his shoulder. "Today's about Oliver." When the engines roared to life, windows rattled across town. Oliver, wrapped in a blanket, sat on the diner's porch with Fox, his eyes wide as row after row of bikers formed an iron river stretching beyond sight. Townsfolk gathered, some skeptical, some awed. At Reaper's signal, the riders thundered out, their formation tight, their presence undeniable. Daniel followed in a borrowed pickup, watching Oliver's laughter spill into the air. It was the first time in months his son looked more alive than sick. That image seared into Daniel's soul, hope riding on 2 wheels, louder than despair. By midday, the ride reached Ashwood's fairgrounds. Vendors set up tents, kids chased balloons, and barbecue smoke drifted through the crowd. Local bands played, amplifiers buzzing beneath the hum of parked motorcycles. Daniel had expected a handful of riders, but over 100 showed, patches from distant states on their backs. Fox grinned as donation jars filled fast. Told you, when we ride, we roll deep. But not everyone was celebrating. A group of townsfolk muttered near the entrance, uneasy with so many bikers. Sheriff Halverson, arms crossed, approached Daniel. I don't like this circus cross. Folks remember old scars. Daniel held his ground. They're here for my son. The sheriff glanced at Oliver, laughing with kids his age, and his face softened, just barely. Keep it clean. You'll answer if it ain't. Late afternoon, Reaper took a makeshift stage, his gravelly voice carrying without a microphone. We ride for brothers, for kids, for anyone who needs thunder behind them. Today it's Oliver. Cheers erupted. Then Fox lifted a tarp, revealing Grace, Daniel's Harley, gleaming like it was reborn. Daniel's breath caught. Reaper smirked. Curtis said she was yours. We bought her back. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Daniel stepped forward, trembling. This bike ain't just metal, Reaper said. It's sacrifice. We're auctioning it. Every dollar goes to Oliver. Daniel's knees nearly buckled, but Fox whispered, trust us. Bidders shouted, wallets opened, and the numbers soared beyond Daniel's wildest hopes. When the gavel struck, Grace sold for more than a year's wages. Tears blurred Daniel's vision as the crowd roared. The bike was gone, but Oliver's chance at life roared louder. Then a familiar figure stepped forward, Sheriff Halverson, who'd long treated bikers like a plague. He cleared his throat. I've been wrong about men like you. Murmurs spread. He handed Daniel an envelope with a check from the Sheriff's Association, a donation larger than Daniel could fathom. For your boy, Halverson said quietly. Reaper narrowed his eyes, but the sheriff extended his hand to Daniel. You're not alone. The handshake, firm and public, was a true seal before the town. Gasps turned to cheers. For years, the line between law and bikers had been war, but loyalty to a sick boy bent even steel. Oliver clapped, shouting, Dad, they're all friends now. For a fleeting moment, Ashwood believed him. As night fell, lanterns glowed between trees, music softened, and laughter carried on the breeze. Daniel sat at a picnic table, Oliver asleep against his chest. Across the lot, bikers shared smokes and stories, their faces relaxed under dim light. But Daniel's mind churned. The auction had raised more than he'd dreamed, but what if it wasn't enough? What if Oliver's condition worsened? Reaper set a steaming coffee down. You're thinking yourself into a grave. Daniel exhaled. What if this still isn't enough? Reaper's gaze hardened. Then we ride again. You don't quit, cause the road's long. Daniel realized this wasn't just about Oliver and Maria, it was about carrying each other, mile after mile. But clouds gathered overhead, heavy with thunder. As the celebration wound down, Curtis Doyle stormed in, waving papers. This is a scam, he shouted. That Harley was mine when you auctioned it. The crowd hushed. Reaper stepped forward, eyes cold. You got your money, Doyle. More than it was worth. Curtis sneered, pointing at Daniel. He's using you. You think bikers can save some sick kid? He'll bleed you dry. Daniel's face flushed with shame, every eye on him. Oliver stirred, whispering, Dad. Doubt threatened to unravel everything. Then Fox strode onto the stage, voice sharp as lightning. You call this a scam? Look at that boy's face. She pointed at Oliver, clutching his blanket, staring wide-eyed. Silence fell, broken by distant thunder. Reaper growled, Careful, Doyle. You're talking to all of us. Engines revved, a warning louder than fists. The storm broke, rain hammering the fairgrounds. People scattered under tents, but Curtis's voice cut through. This town's being played by criminals. His words hit harder than the rain. Daniel's pride cracked. He stood, clutching Oliver. He's right, he said hoarsely. I'm no one special. I failed him over and over. His voice shook with raw honesty. Silence fell, broken only by rain on tin roofs. Reaper stepped forward, face grim. Listen, brother. You didn't fail. You sold your freedom for your son's life. That's the bravest thing a man can do. The bikers formed a wall around Daniel and Oliver, engines drowning Curtis's protests. This man, this boy, were theirs now. No insult would touch them. By dawn, the storm cleared, and Ashwood's main street shook with Harleys. Daniel, in a borrowed sidecar with Oliver bundled beside him, stared as over 200 riders assembled, chrome flashing under the rising sun. Reaper raised his hand, and silence fell, heavy with meaning. "Today, this boy rides with us," he declared. Engines roared like an oath. The escort rolled through town, slow and deliberate. Neighbors stepped out, stunned, watching Oliver grin, arms raised like wings. Some cheered, some wept, some stood frozen as their streets became rivers of steel and loyalty. For Daniel, it was redemption made real, his sacrifice reborn as something larger. The convoy reached Ashwood General, a grim hospital that usually smelled of fear. But when 200 bikers pulled in, engines shaking the glass, it became something else. Nurses rushed to windows, doctors stepped outside, patients pressed faces to glass. Reaper carried Oliver inside, boots squeaking on linoleum. The head physician tried to protest, but seeing Oliver clinging to Reaper's jacket, smiling wider than illness allowed, he fell silent. "He's here for treatment," Daniel said, voice steady. Bikers stacked envelopes of cash and checks on the counter, the pile growing until it nearly toppled. Fox leaned close to the doctor. "Make sure this kid gets every chance. He's got an army watching." The staff nodded, moved beyond words. The hospital became a battlefield where Oliver wasn't fighting alone. As Oliver was wheeled to his ward, Reaper pressed something into Daniel's handgrace keys. Daniel shook his head. "She's gone. Auctioned." Reaper's eyes softened. "The man who bought her was one of us. Said some rides belong to their riders forever." Daniel stared at the keys, tears cutting through the grime on his face. Outside, bikers lined the entrance, helmets off, standing like soldiers. Daniel pushed Oliver's wheelchair down the corridor, the sound of engines echoing like a heartbeat. Reaper raised 2 fingers. Every biker saluted, fists pounding chests. Oliver laughed, raising his tiny hand in mimicry. The gesture said what words couldn't: loyalty, love, a promise that father and son would never walk alone. That night, as Ashwood settled, Daniel sat by Oliver's bed. The boy's breathing steadied, his cheeks brighter with hope. Through the window, the distant rumble of departing engines was a lullaby of steel and brotherhood. "You've got more than me now, son," Daniel whispered. "You've got an army." Oliver stirred, smiling in his sleep. For Daniel, it no longer mattered how the world judged him or the men who rode beside him. Sacrifice had called forth loyalty, and loyalty had built something unbreakable. What do you think? Did Daniel betray his pride by accepting the bikers' help, or was it the bravest choice he could make? Should the town have trusted the Hells Angels, or was Curtis right to call it a scam? Would you stand with a man like Daniel, or walk away from a fight that wasn't yours? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if this story hit you hard, and subscribe to never miss another tale of grit, grace, and the kind of loyalty that roars louder than thunder.